Frankenstein is the man, not the monster. If you're just finding that out and wondering how on earth this became such a huge misconception, then join me in a little discussion of the classic Gothic novel Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. As we go over some details of the story, in the end, when you think about who's responsible or who causes more suffering, you might have your answer as to why both man and monster have been dubbed Frankenstein. Written by Mary Shelley and first published in 1818, Frankenstein is the story of young Victor Frankenstein, a curious student dabbling in natural science and galvanism with the intent on creating a man from corpses. His experiment goes right, but then quickly goes awfully wrong. With Shelley's original 1818 edition ending at 258 pages, Frankenstein leaves room for its readers to explore and ruminate over its themes, messages, and tragic ending. In fact, in just over 200 pages, for many, Frankenstein reads as four stories in one: an allegory, a fable, an epistolary novel, and an autobiography, a chaos of literary fertility. Some of the more explicit messages include warnings about the dangers of unbridled curiosity. The war between good and evil is essentially the same as the war between knowledge and ignorance, known and unknown, natural and supernatural, and there is no possibility of diffusing the two dualities once the threshold is crossed from one to another. They are inextricably linked. And though it's not a disapproval of the desire to ask new questions, try new experiments, and reach new scientific heights, it's a call to action to carefully consider consequences. How powerless we are to the consequences of our misdeeds and blunders, to ever going back in time and changing them, how that particularly puts us at risk, how vulnerable and defenseless we are to utter tragedy, as Victor comes to learn as he loses his loved ones, one after the other. Take, for example, the qualm about artificial intelligence and robots, or about the creation of deadly weapons like in the case of the atomic bomb in Oppenheimer. Though we are complex and intellectual creatures who can't help but seek knowledge, it'll only lead us to become ineffectual and calamitous in the process. Consider Frankenstein and his unrelenting need to pursue the unknown. His insidious temptation to learn more about natural science and galvanism simply because he was discouraged by his father not to read books on those subjects. His young mind saw it as a challenge. Frankenstein is our monster. Monster is derived from the Latin monere, warning. Frankenstein and his creature is our warning. But more importantly, what does the way Victor viewed creation and the way he went about his process mean for his creation? We know that Victor wantonly bestowed life upon the creature. Because Victor is motivated by a need for notoriety, he doesn't stop to consider what it is to create. He does not regard the challenges, the responsibility, or even his right to create. He especially does not consider what the creature will be like or whether it will be compatible for the world of natural human beings. He works in a frenzy. The passages in which we are reading about Frankenstein's trials and experiments are some of the darkest scenes in the entire novel. Shelley uses words like tortured, frantic, filthy to suggest Victor as nightmarish and his efforts as perverse. This is likely why, when Victor finds himself alone with his creation, he does not use any rationale or discretion. He runs. He abandons it. And that leads us to consider the existential implications of the novel and the monster. The easy part is done. Curiosity kills. There can be too much of a good thing. So, on to the monster. Unnamed, motherless, fatherless, friendless, and abandoned at birth, he was purposely created and then recklessly abandoned, the product of a freak experiment. Over time, the monster has become a social emblem for the marginalized, the different, the other. Jill Lepore, writer of the article I quoted from earlier, likened the monster's experience to that of Frederick Douglass's. The experience of a slave cast out and utterly rejected, sojourning for a place of peace. This leads us to another major explicit message in Frankenstein, which is about the brutality and barbarity of man, and the prejudices we enact based on physical appearance and differences. The monster gives an account of the horrible treatment he suffered from people, even those he tried to protect, or those he cherished and loved. It makes us aware of what this kind of maltreatment can do, and maybe even provides justification for the monster's murders. Given the connection between monster and man, Frankenstein explores the analogous relationship between Victor and the monster, and God and man. Think about those who are orphaned before they can even walk, those alone and bereft with no one to love them, those born with deformities or debilitating disabilities, and neglected, abused, and mistreated consequently, those ignored by society because they're not physically appealing, or because of their race, gender, sex, and various other binaries, those who hold such wonder and magnanimity in their hearts, only to be rejected by the very beings who impressed so daringly upon them. Who else can be condemned for his experiences, or his nature, more than his creator? Similarly, he asks what the point of his creation was if he was bound to be loveless, unhappy, unaccepted. Perhaps this is why, on the original title page of Frankenstein, Shelley quotes Milton's Paradise Lost. Did I request thee, Maker, from my clay, to mold me man? Did I solicit thee from darkness to promote me? What's so powerful about this quote is that it is critical of the act of creation, questioning whether it is wanton and therefore deliberately promoting pain and suffering, which most would consider evil. The creature, or anyone for that matter, does not ask or solicit themselves to be born or created, let alone born and created with such odds against them. Shelley suggested a revolutionary thing. If we know that Frankenstein and the monster's relationship is analogous to man and God's relationship, or can at least be likened to Adam and God's relationship, specifically in the early passages of Genesis, then we too can accuse God of mistreatment, of abandonment, of creating with reckless abandon. The implications settle with an almost physical force that undeniably disgraces God or the monster's creator, Frankenstein, and accuses them of the utmost neglect and wickedness. Coming full circle, let's address Frankenstein's creator, or better considered, author, Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin Shelley. In connection to this feeling of abandonment and disconnect and despair regarding life, creator, and creation, Shelley experienced lots of loss in her life that's been strongly thought to be linked to the novel. Starting with her mother, the feminist Mary Wollstonecraft, who died shortly after giving birth to Shelley. Then, as Shelley became a mother, 3 of her 4 children passed, and Shelley even experienced a miscarriage that almost took her life. The former wife of her husband, Percy Bysshe Shelley, committed suicide, and her own husband, Percy Bysshe Shelley, drowned at sea. Not ever knowing her mother, losing 3 of her children, is certainly cause for the dark, existential, and gothic tones and sentiments in the novel Frankenstein. The act of abandonment of senses, control, and creation, seems to be the center of the gothic genre in this novel. The unending, unpredictable, uncontrollable effects that life, death, birth, and creation can have on humanity are devastating. It seems that the Gothic in this story is concerned with a special kind of terror, a psychological, conditional terror. When I say conditional, I refer to the condition of man, our nature. When Victor breaks down after his fear and trials with the monster, when he becomes delirious and sickly, it's because he's horrified at the potentials of his mistakes. Otherwise seemingly well-natured aspirations to reach scientific heights reaped the absolute worst. A monster that is so inhumane in Victor's eyes that he can only be derivative of the supernatural. The idea that we can be capable of such creations, that we ourselves are accessories of and vessels for those creations that cannot be controlled, and the desire to have and make more of these creations cannot also be controlled. And so it is terrifyingly resounding when the monster says, "You are my creator, but I am your master. Obey." What I love about Frankenstein and the way it explored the Gothic genre is how it focuses on the nature and origin of terror and horror, how it is inscribed and infused into humanity, the potential for evil, the chance of danger in the unknown, the bounds by which terror can be enacted, by who and what are unknown. Psychological terror materializes and manifests into a unique existential crisis. Before we get into the big questions, let's recap the ending of the novel. The falling action occurs immediately once the creature has awoken after Victor's long and isolating experiments with cadavers and parts from animals. The fingers begin to point towards Frankenstein in an accusatory way once he decides to reject and abandon the creature. The monster knows nothing and no one else but Victor, which means he knows nothing else but abandonment. As he explains, he was like a child who's new to the senses and has no knowledge or experience of evil. He was overrun with splendor and fascination of the moon and sun and the nature around him. But all that splendor and fascination was destroyed by the deliberate actions of Victor and other men and women alike. By the end, the monster has murdered numerous people, most of them being Victor's loved ones, including Victor's new wife, Elizabeth. Victor refused to complete one redeeming task: create a partner for the monster. Victor agrees, but then goes back on his word. The monster, left lonely, desolate, and in utter despair, becomes enraged in Victor's failure to comply to his one wish, a favor that would remedy the terrible experience the monster was forced to endure at the hands of Victor Frankenstein. Misery, tragedy, despair, and death. Frankenstein had charge over his creation. He was his intercessor, his creator, truly the only person who could have saved him. And he refused to do that, and in doing so, further disparaged his creature. So, the final questions. Is Victor responsible for the monster? And who causes more suffering? Yes, Victor is responsible. Because Frankenstein wanted to create a superhuman, a man, we can apply the same standards to him as we would to any other people procreating the natural way. Frankenstein didn't expect his creature to have the same emotional and intellectual faculties as natural human beings. He probably expected human cattle with senses like that of a domesticated animal. But this boils down to the unchecked curiosity and carelessness with which Frankenstein created. These philosophical questions and concerns were never thought about. Therefore, it is without a doubt that Frankenstein causes the most suffering. He committed the act of creation, which isn't so bad on its own, but then he abandons his creation and then refuses to do the one thing that would have saved everyone he loved. Now, I just want to point out that there could be arguments made against the monster and the murders he committed. The monster was well-read, educated, compassionate, and against the vices of humanity like war and murder. He could have withheld revenge for some higher moral duty, but in the end, that wasn't Shelley's point, I don't think. And no matter how much the monster tried to coexist and disregard the maltreatment he was receiving, the assumption is that it was and would have remained impossible. He was an utter reject, and with that kind of futility, it was all about excitating that intrinsic struggle, making it known and felt, acting with true abandon. So, thank you guys for sticking around for that kind of formal discussion of Frankenstein. So, like I said in the beginning of the video, I'll now go into the more casual review and just talk about how I liked the book and some strengths and weaknesses that I picked up on about the book. Not necessarily that I have made, but just statements that I've seen other people say about the novel. So, as far as strengths and me personally, I really enjoyed the fact that the novel was very worldly. I just wasn't expecting that from a classic novel. Shelley incorporated, like, especially with the monster, like, he was truly super educated, but she talked about different religions. Like, I saw, like, she mentioned Muslims in the book and Native Americans, and the fact that their land was stolen, and poverty, and all these different worldly things that I just one wouldn't have expected from the monster, but then also just when I just didn't expect to be in the novel. I really enjoyed it because of that. And then I also really liked at least getting to experience the villain arc, I called it. Like, it seems like the monster, and it makes sense because Frankenstein is a classic, but it seems like the monster is like the original villain archetype. Like, he just, the way he started from being this really generous and caring and loving, hopeful person about the world and humanity into turning into this monster that just murders people. I really was able to draw the connection between, like, villains that we see in contemporary media and contemporary stories and books. So I just really loved that. And in my head, I was really thinking of, like, the Grinch, and, like, I just remembering scenes from the movie, like montages of him being this really loving young Grinch in love, happy, but then people started bullying him and ostracizing him and leaving him out, and because of his physical differences. And so it just seems like, that's the start of a villain. It was just so cool to experience that and read that, hundreds of years back till now, we're still having the same kind of, like, issues, the same kind of cycle. And then, as far as the weaknesses for Frankenstein, so overall, I enjoyed the novel. I gave it 4 stars. I didn't really have anything to comment on the weaknesses of the novel because, for me, when I'm reading a classic, I'm trying to see what messages I can learn, what this novel can tell me about humanity past and humanity current, and maybe even humanity future. But when I was reviewing on Goodreads and, like, going through people's comments, I've seen some people say that the language was unrealistic because it was too feminine, and of course, Mary Shelley is a female author, and to me, that doesn't make any difference. Like, okay, there's different voices, different writing styles, of course, from two different genders, and that's just how it is. And the story was still good enough. It wasn't lacking in any seriousness. It wasn't lacking in any heaviness or gothicness. It was just right. Also, another perspective of that is that the monster's language was unrealistic because he was a monster, and him being so educated and reading all these really complex novels and books, and knowing about humans' history and wars and stuff. Some people said that that was a bit unrealistic for the monster. But again, it's the point of the story. Frankenstein is not just a plain novel, it is, an allegory, a fable. And so the monster, yes, in the story, he is a monster, but he's supposed to represent. He can represent, and he does represent human beings, people, that we just choose to set aside because of their physical differences, because of just any perceived difference physically, mentally, emotionally, racially, sexually, all of that stuff. So that wasn't a weakness for me, but that's just what some people have said. And the last thing that I kind of noted, it didn't take away from it, but I really honestly truly thought that Frankenstein was gonna, like, have me quaking, but it wasn't scary. And I know that Gothic isn't the same as horror, so it didn't take away anything for me, and I still enjoyed the novel. And I think it was scary in its own particular way, like I mentioned in the video, in the discussion and analysis. And so now, what to read next? Because there's a lot of literature that's referenced, particularly by the monster. So the monster first, or not first, but at some point he references Lives by Plutarch, which I believe he was like a philosopher or something. He mentions that, and I'm not too informed on what Lives is. I know it's probably like some nonfiction of some sort, but I am intrigued to pick it up. I love philosophy. I have a little collection of philosophy, so it'd be really awesome to pick that up soon. And then the first thing that caught my eye that made me continue with reading Frankenstein was the quote from Paradise Lost that Shelley uses. I believe it was on the original title page, but it's a quote that I mentioned in the video where it says, did I, ask you, maker, to mold me from clay into man? Did I solicit you to promote me from darkness? That quote on its own really connected with me, really hit me hard. And one, it made me want to read Frankenstein, and two, now it really makes me want to read Paradise Lost. Paradise Lost is another classic. It's an epic poem about Satan and God, and basically reversing the roles, like seeing the side of Satan and having compassion for Satan. So I really, really want to get into that. I actually have it on my shelf, so I should be getting to that. Maybe, I guess, spooky season, Halloween. That'll be fun to read. And then another pick is the narrative of a life of a slave. I believe that's the title, by Frederick Douglass. The reason why I want to read that next is because the author, Jill Lepore, the writer who did the article that I referenced a couple times in this video, she compared Douglass's life to the monster's experience and how they're kind of similar. Um, and just the quotes that she used to reference um, Douglass's book, they sounded really intriguing and really like emotive, and I really want to read it and check it out. And I know that it's like one of the best books ever written. So I really want to check that out, and you should too, so you can learn a little bit more about the monster's experience, this separation that he's feeling, this hopelessness in his connection with human beings, and how almost it seemed impossible. Um, and then lastly, oh well, not lastly, but we have the Sorrows of Young Werther by Goethe. I'm sorry, the pronunciation is really like particular with that, but that book, the monster referenced in particular to explain how he felt, particularly like feelings of dejection and not even wanting to be alive, and not feeling like no one in the world cared about him. He had no one who cared about him, no one who loved him, no one who would think twice about him being gone. And so I'm really excited to read that soon one day, because I know that that one is pretty um, popular, and also the story sounds amazing and really heart wrenching. And then lastly, just to wrap it up, I guess I would recommend the article that I read, um, the Joe Lepore talking about Frankenstein. So let me just get the title. So if you just search up The New Yorker, which is the site that it's on, and then The Strange and Twisted Life of Frankenstein, that's the title of the article. It's a really great read. I read it on like audio while driving home one day, and it gave me some really good insight into Shelley's life, the connection between Frankenstein and Shelley's life, and also to my edition of Frankenstein. This is a Bantam Classics, but this had a really good introduction about Shelley, and I learned a lot about her tumultuous, crazy kind of life. With her husband, and all the children they lost, and how she almost lost her life, and all that not good stuff, but all that informative stuff that really, really, really um, makes a world of a difference when reading Frankenstein, because you start to see the themes and experiences overlap. So that was great. Overall, I had so much fun making this video. I like video essays, and I figured it would be more enjoyable to have a video essay format when reviewing slash discussing a book, just because reviewing, discussing a book, and just sitting there can be a lot for some people. It can be tedious. People might not want to watch that. But if I have like B-roll that supports and enhances the video, I figured that'd be a much more smarter way to do a discussion or review of a book. But have no fear, I still have my like casual wrap ups and you know, book shopping videos and all that stuff. I just wanted to incorporate this because I like watching these and it's really important to me. I like really writing essays and analyzing text. That's like one of my strengths, I think. I can be really good at analyzing, and the analysis might not even make sense. I have a lot of fun with like picking evidence and quotes and lines to support the ideas or the um themes or messages I'm seeing in a novel. So, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know if you like this, if you want more. And have a good day and keep on reading. Bye.